It is a sin to deliberately miss Mass on Sundays and Holydays, because the first of the 6 precepts of the Church commands us to assist at Mass on these days. This is a grave obligation, which a traditional catechism teaches is binding on all Catholics, unless reasonably excused, under pain of mortal sin. Now, just a reminder for those who may not be familiar with the traditional catechism. For a sin to be mortal, 3 things are necessary: grave matter, full knowledge, and full consent. On account of the absence of good catechetical instruction, many Catholics may have been erring in this matter in good faith. However, the precept of attending Mass on Sundays and Holydays remains a grave obligation, regardless of what anyone else may say. The 3rd commandment given by God is to keep the Sabbath day holy. The Church has further determined how this is to be done, namely by hearing Mass. God has given His own authority to these precepts of the Church, and to refuse to obey them is to disobey God Himself. That is why this is such a grave obligation. To attempt to sanctify Sunday in our own way, while refusing to do so in the way that God wants, is clearly a sin against the 1st commandment as well as the 3rd. It is putting strange gods, like self, or sport, or family, or social events, or anything else, before God. The Baltimore Catechism is very clear on this point when it says, quote, "We offer God false worship by rejecting the religion He has instituted, and following one pleasing to ourselves, with a form of worship He has never authorized, approved, or sanctioned." End quote. Unfortunately today, this form of false worship is very common. Sport is one of the things which is often given priority to the Mass, even on Sundays. Some people think it is enough to just be a good person, be nice to others, get on well with people, and don't offend anyone, and maybe say a few prayers at home. But this is not what God has asked. Unless we are reasonably prevented from attending Mass, the way God wants us to sanctify Sunday and Holydays is very clear. To fulfill the obligation of attending Mass, it must be a complete Mass. We must be physically present, with sufficient attention, and with the intention of hearing Mass. We do not fulfill our obligation by deliberately arriving so late that we miss a considerable part of the Mass, or by watching it online without being there in person. If we are physically present but are asleep through the entire Mass, or deliberately give our attention to other things without any intention of following the Mass, we do not fulfill our obligation either. I remember hearing of a group of teenagers who used to sit at the back of the church playing cards during the Mass. They were only there because their parents made them go, and they would have had no intention of going there to assist at Mass. This is just one example of how we can be present at Mass without actually fulfilling the obligation of attending it. Although far too many people dispense themselves from the obligation of attending Mass without sufficient cause, there are actually many reasonable excuses from attending Mass which the Catechism lists. The most common ones are severe illness, great distance from the Church, and duties of state which cannot be neglected or postponed. Also, we are not obliged to attend Mass if it could result in spiritual harm to ourselves or others. This is generally the case with the so-called new Mass, which tends to weaken rather than strengthen faith. The fear of catching some disease or missing out on some social event does not dispense us from the obligation of attending Mass. Of course, even if we can't attend Mass, we are still obliged to abstain from unnecessary servile work. But beyond that, there are several other ways of sanctifying Sundays and Holydays when Mass attendance is not possible. It is very good and helpful to read through the prayers of the Mass, to make a fervent spiritual communion, to listen to a recorded sermon, and to spend time in spiritual reading. In Catholic families, this should be done by the whole family together, rather than leaving each one to do it alone. Also, Sundays are a good opportunity for catechism, reading the catechism, and practicing corporal and spiritual works of mercy, which many people may find themselves too busy to perform during the week. The Mass is so important for the faithful because it is chiefly through the Mass that the merits of Christ's passion and death are applied to us, that sins are forgiven and graces are received. For those who have any understanding of the value of the Mass, the obligation of attending Mass on Sundays and Holydays is a joy rather than a burden. Likewise, the obligation to receive Holy Communion once a year is but the bare minimum expected of Catholics, and the faithful who really understands its value will not be content with merely receiving Holy Communion once a year. The faithful should understand that the worthy reception of Holy Communion is the chief way of fully participating in the Mass and reaping its benefits, something which is practically impossible for those who are content to watch Mass online from the comfort of their own living room. The Mass is intimately connected to the salvation and sanctification of souls. It is the renewal and continuation of the sacrifice of Calvary, without which there would have been no redemption. The graces we need in order to save our souls were purchased for us on Calvary, it is true, but it is chiefly through the Mass that this infinite treasure is applied to souls. The Mass also, far more than any other prayer, pays our debt of gratitude to God, and offers him a divine homage worthy of himself. In the Mass, it is not merely a human and imperfect sacrifice which is offered to God, such as we might offer on our own, but it is a perfect and divine sacrifice. By uniting our own prayers and sacrifices to that of Christ in the Mass, we offer to God the most pleasing homage of which we are capable. Let us therefore learn to love this great treasure and understand it better, the treasure of the Holy Catholic Mass, and let us make every effort to attend it not only on Sundays and Holydays, but as often as possible.